Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Tonight, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind for a little over a month now, and it stemmed from a post that, one of those guys that, fires all different kinds of weaponry and, lifts weights and stuff like that made. And, he's got a lot of tough guy friends. And he basically said, um, for anybody who wants to be on my team, the answer is no. And, it's kind of an obvious thing, but I don't think when anybody has said, ooh, can I be on your team, that they honestly felt like, that person would say yes. And it just kind of threw me off a little bit, but I know that during this time, there are some people seriously out there wondering, like, what am I going to do if things get extra crazy? So I'm here to tell you that the size of your army doesn't matter. And we're going to go over 4 stories in Second Kings just about that. The first story comes from Second Kings chapter 6, where basically the king of Aram was constantly at war with Israel. And anytime that he would try and set up a camp somewhere, it just seemed like the king of Israel would always know. And so he kind of got upset about it and asked his men, can you guys find me who this insider is? And his men were like, well, there kind of really isn't an insider in our camp per se, but there is a prophet in Israel, and his name is Elisha, and he knows so much, he basically knows what's going on in your bedroom and can tell the king of Israel. So he got really upset about that, and he sent men to an area called Doshan, where Elisha was, to have him seized. And then so the next morning, Elisha's servant gets up and he goes outside and he sees that there's a ton of men just surrounding the city. So when that happens, we're now going to read verses 15 to 19. And if you want to, you can follow along. But anyway, this is how the story goes. He says, "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike this enemy with blindness." Now that's a second protection right there. First, he's surrounded by chariots of basically angels and fire, and now he's going to strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, "This is not the road. This is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for." And he led them to Samaria. Samaria is where the Israelite army was. So that's the first. The second story out of Second Kings is in chapter 7. And that one has to do with where the Arameans led siege to Samaria, and they were basically cutting off the way for anybody to get in or out. So these people underwent extreme famine, and it was to the point where the details of this are kind of gross. And honestly, if you have kids, I don't think you'd even want them to read this chapter. But the king himself got very desperate. And then so Elisha had spoke to him and said, tomorrow the food's going to get super cheap and everybody will be just fine. And a lot of people there had a hard time believing that was even possible. So at dusk the next day, there were these men with leprosy that were at the gate. And we're going to read verses 5 through 7. And it's talking about the lepers right here. It says, "At dusk they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses, a great army. So they said to one another, 'Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us.' So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents, their horses, and their donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives." So basically, These guys had a hallucination in the middle of the night and just left. God sent them a strong delusion and they were gone. The third story of protection we're going to talk about is in 2 Kings chapter 19. And in that chapter, Hezekiah was the king of Jerusalem, and the king of Assyria kept taunting him and just basically trash talking all the other nations that he had defeated before, and was saying, don't let your God deceive you into thinking that he's just gonna, hand us over to you. You guys are not gonna win. Look at all these other gods that all these other people followed, and none of them saved him, so I don't care what you say about your God, he's not gonna save you. And Hezekiah prayed to God about this. And he points out, Lord, he is blaspheming your name. And the Lord does get really ticked off. And he has a lot to say, but we're just going to go over a few of those verses. And so we're in 2 Kings chapter 19. We're going to go verses 27 to 28, and then finish it off with 32 to 35. And so 27 to 28 is the Lord's response, and it's part of it. And he says, concerning the king of Assyria, but I know where you are, and when you come and go, and how you rage against me. Because you rage against me, and because your insolence has reached my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will make you return by the way you came. Therefore, this is what the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria. He will not enter this city, or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield, or build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. I will defend this city and save it, for my sake and for the sake of David my servant. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. So the king of Assyria broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. The fourth story of protection in 2 Kings is in chapter 1. And I say this one for last because I feel like it's a little more personal. This story is from when Ahaziah was the king of Israel. And he had this accident where he fell from the upper room. And he was a king that did not follow anything that God said, and he just worshipped idols. And so he was trying to figure out what his fate was going to be after this accident. So he sent some messengers to go to another place to go inquire of Beelzebub. And God started talking to the prophet Elijah. And he said to him, you know what, stop the messengers and tell them this, is there not a God in Israel? Like, why are you guys going to go to Beelzebub like he's going to be able to tell you anything? But I'll tell you this, you're going to stay in your bed and you're going to die. So the messengers went back to the king, delivered that message, and the king became furious. So he went ahead and sent 50 men after him, and this is what happens. If you want to follow along, we're going to start in verse 9 and go to 15. And this is what it says. Then he sent to Elijah a captain with his company of 50 men. The captain went up to Elijah, who was sitting on the top of a hill, and said to him, Man of God, the king says, come down. Then Elijah answered the captain, If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. Then fire fell from heaven and consumed the captain and his men. At this, the king sent to Elijah another captain with his 50 men. The captain said to him, Man of God, this is what the king says. Come down at once. If I am a man of God, Elijah replied, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. Then the fire of God fell from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. So the king sent a third captain with his 50 men. The third captain went up and fell on his knees before Elijah. Man of God, he begged, please have respect for my life and the lives of these 50 men, your servants. See, fire has fallen from heaven and consumed the first two captains and other men, but now have respect for my life. The angel of the Lord said to Elijah, Go down with him. Do not be afraid of him. So Elijah got up and went down with him to the king. So in this case, God was like, took out the first two groups of people. Now you're going to send a third. Well, then the second form of protection there was literally an angel being sent to him and told, hey, you're going to be fine. Just go ahead and go with them. And I would like to finish this with a verse out of the book of Psalms that I know so many people have heard over and over again. But now that you have at least 4 stories from the book of 2 Kings to kind of illustrate how this happens, hopefully that makes you feel better about hearing this. And it says this, 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of the wicked. Because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place, no evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways. Sorry for the noise of the dog, the bunny, and the cockatiel. Hope you guys have a blessed evening. Good night.